Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and this looks to be our main villain for Ninjago Dragons Rising Season 3. This is Thunderfang, the Dragon of Chaos, and it is a main villain-focused set featuring a brand new character which I cannot wait to learn more about. Now, we learned a lot about Thunderfang during my interview with the set designers, learning that he is from the First Realm, wanted to become a Source Dragon but was denied that, and was placed in imprisonment underneath a mountain. But that's pretty much all we know. But this set is bound to be one of the most interesting Ninjago sets of all time, featuring one of the largest builds for a villain dragon yet. I cannot wait to jump into an in-depth review of the set, and so, without further ado, let's jump right into our look at Thunderfang, the Dragon of Chaos, who is now hovering above my LEGO city. Let's go right now. Alright, so for this review, we're gonna do something a little different. Back in September, LEGO challenged me to photograph Thunderfang in all sorts of different outdoor environments, and so we'll be using some of that footage in this review as well, because I feel like I was able to get so many fun and interesting shots of the character, and being able to play around with him outdoors and really pose him up gave me a much deeper appreciation of the build. I think that this is one of the most expressive LEGO Dragon builds ever, and while the posability isn't even that great in terms of the legs, or even when he comes to the body itself, I just feel like there's so much character in the build. It's menacing, he feels alive, intelligent, and sinister, and there's a lot that you can do with Thunderfang. And hopefully some of these outdoor shots are going to showcase exactly the potential behind what you can do with this set. Now, Thunderfang comes out on March 1st and will retail for $70 US. It's set number 71832 and contains 668 pieces, which is fairly decent value for what you get, especially given that it is utilizing new colors of a new mold introduced for Ninjago for the tail and these two gigantic vinyl wings. So far, it only contains one exclusive minifigure, which is Aaron in his black suit. It also includes Tear, we don't really know the pronunciation of it yet, but a named Dragonian character who's pretty much identical to the other Dragonians, other than it actually has longer horns on the back. It's the second set so far to include Noct, the elemental master of brute force, and also comes with Sora in her Season 1 Dragons Rising outfit. However, she does have the newer style of hairpiece they introduced for Season 2, as well as Lloyd and Nia in their storm suits. Thunderfang actually has a really interesting side build, which we'll take a look at as soon as we get into the main part of the review, which actually has a very clever function. But pulling the focus back onto Thunderfang himself, this is one of the most expressive and alive dragon builds that LEGO has ever put out. We got the Overlord Dragon back for Ninjago Legacy, but that was a bit of a smaller set, and previous villain dragons haven't really been characters of their own, with the Morrow Dragon or the Ninja and Mech Dragon being more physical obstacles for the ninja to overcome. But by the looks of it, Thunderfang is going to be a primary antagonist for Dragons Rising. He's the entire reason why the Forbidden Five are trying to free their master, and I'm really curious to see exactly how this is going to turn out in the show. And I feel like this set really does accomplish the feeling of having this be some sort of conniving and intelligent creature. You can see he has a hunched back in the way he's built. Of course, when he's freed, the chains are dangling all around him. I love just how much character was built into the build here, where you have the claws stretching outwards, or the chains connecting one of the arms to the neck. It's just such a unique design, and it really feels like some sort of ancient evil that's been unleashed. This is a really well done dragon, but of course there are a few cons. I think it absolutely could have benefited by the use of elbows. It is just using the standard SCCBS fixed joints, and while those do work okay for all intents and purposes, I definitely feel like being able to articulate the elbows would have helped a ton, and the legs themselves actually don't really give you that much play because the legs are pretty much fixed. You can move the legs back and forth and side to side, but because of the way the body is built, there's not that much you can do with it. Still, the wings are fully articulatable on ball joints, which is really great, allowing you to utilize the full wingspan to showcase the storm-like features, and there's a lot to love when it comes to this dragon. The dragon itself, again, has so much character built into it. He's almost spindly and looks a little bit malnourished in some areas, especially around the center spine, which normally might have been a con when it comes to a more imposing villain dragon, but I feel like that intentionally fits the backstory very well, where what we know of him so far is that he was a dragon who fought in the Oni versus Dragon Wars in the First Realm. He wanted to ascend to become a Source Dragon, but was denied by the Council and imprisoned by the Archdragon of Focus underneath a mountain in the First Realm, and that's basically where he's been for thousands upon thousands of years, so it makes sense that he might not be in peak fighting condition. I can see the hunched back showing his age, and I can absolutely see him being some sort of ancient and powerful evil, but commanding the Forbidden Five from the shadows. But moving onwards to the side build here, one thing I really want to call out that is probably one of my favorite functions of the set is if you take two of the prismatic blades, where of course Noct here has arrived to free his master, you can insert them into this side build and it needs both blades inserted in order to free Thunderfang. And it's a really clever mechanism. It's simple in how it works, but it is so smart, and kudos to the designer for actually coming up with this. As you can see, inserting just one of the swords isn't enough to free him from his chains, but if you take the second sword and place it into the next slot, then it lifts the mechanism up high enough so that you can actually remove the chain from the mechanism and free Thunderfang. It's a really clever story-driven mechanism that, again, is really the point of this entire set. Everything is built around the story of this creature, which is just something that works incredibly well for me. The mechanism itself is very simple. There's essentially a piece that's held upside down, held downwards by gravity, a couple of 1x2 chi slopes on the inside, and then once you actually remove the two swords, you'll see it closes shut and locks the mechanism shut. When I got a chance to interview the designers of the set, they mentioned that while simple, this took quite a while to engineer, and I can absolutely see why. It's a really cool mechanism that makes the side build one of the most interesting side builds in a world where typically builds like these are kind of throwaway builds and you don't really think twice about them after putting together a set. You really want the main focus of the set to be on the big item, but this is actually one of my favorite parts of the set, and I'd love to see more cool mechanisms like this be integrated into side builds of future sets because I feel like it elevates the value of it so much. Moving on from this though, let's take a look at the dragon again. Once more, the color scheme is phenomenal. And really my only big issue with the dragon is the lack of articulation in the legs. The feet themselves are mounted on dual ball joints, which typically is a sign of pretty good articulation, but unfortunately it doesn't mean you can move them back and forth. You basically can only move them angled side to side, and I feel like that definitely does restrict the articulation of this figure a ton. You essentially have to have the legs perfectly straight in the exact same configuration for both legs to even move it around. You can't really put him in a walking pose because he's just going to fall over because, again, you can't move the feet. This is an example of LEGO maybe overcompensating a little bit in terms of making the articulation be super limited for kids to be able to play with it. I appreciate the effort to make it somewhat movable, but I definitely do feel like just being able to articulate the legs a little more would have gone a long way, especially because the rest of the figure is so expressive, with the hunched back and the long claws and the arms and the tan spikes. It's a really expressive build for a dragon, and one of the best ones. The other minor issue here is the way the jaws attached is really strange. I really prefer it when LEGO utilizes a mix between these pre-molded elements and system brick-built pieces, just like they did with Lloyd's legendary dragon, and while I do understand that that may unnecessarily increase the parts count, which can be used for other parts of the dragon, I definitely do feel like it would have made this set a lot better if the neck just actually felt a little bit more realistic in the way the jaws attached. As of right now, it's just utilizing the newer LEGO City kind of bar connector piece they used for scooters, and it just feels a little bit strange and hollow. It detracts from the realism of the character being a living, breathing thing, and makes it feel more like a toy or more like a mechanical piece of equipment, which isn't really the intent they're trying to go for, especially with such a very organic looking dragon. The rest of it though is really great. It is surprisingly interesting to build and put together with the angles of the hunched back, and at least for me this was was not the most straightforward building process. I may have done that to myself because I actually put this together without instructions. They sent it to me super early, but just in a bag of pieces alongside a glued finished model, so I basically had to take a look at the glued version and just piece it together by eyeballing the outside of it. So maybe part of that is on me, but I genuinely do think it was really interesting to put it together, and I actually enjoyed putting this together a lot more because I didn't have instructions and kind of had to figure out how all the angles worked and how everything went. So altogether, I think I got everything right, but it was super fun to put together and figure out. It's definitely a lot more complex than it seems. Now, on the outset, when I first saw this, I actually was a little bit underwhelmed by the design. I felt like for such a villain dragon to be an important character, maybe it should have been a larger set and maybe more bulky and have more articulation, but the more time I had to actually play with him and pose him outside especially, I began to really like the build a lot, and it really started to grow on me. I honestly feel like after playing around with this for a couple months, it may be one of my favorite Ninjago dragons ever, and that's saying a lot. I know that this definitely isn't going to be for everyone, and I know a ton of people are not going to be super happy with the limited articulation, but the good thing is that you can change that around. Just change around the SCCBS pieces for the elbows and maybe use your own joints, but honestly, he doesn't really even need that much more articulation. The big one is just for the lower feet. I really wish I could get him in a walking pose because he is so expressive in how he's built. I think one of my favorite features is that, again, you have a very story-driven display here, where he has some sort of a collar chaining him around his neck that looks really cool, but definitely something that's more put on artificially with chains binding him to a certain place. You have all sorts of different chains attached to the rest of the body, from the arms to the hands to the elbows, and it's just a really interesting design. And if anything, I kind of wish there were more chains attached to him. Maybe something like wrapping a chain around the chest would have been really interesting, or having some chains dangling from the ankles or the legs. I feel like that would have just added a lot more character to the build, and while I do really like it as it is, it definitely does feel very interesting to have more chains because that just adds more to the story. Overall, that about sums up my look at the dragon itself. It's not perfect, but it is really fun to pose, and I'm very excited to see what people think of this model, especially when you have it in hand. I have a feeling it's gonna surprise you. The official images don't necessarily do justice just how much fun this is to play with. But before we wrap up this review, it's now time to take a look at the minifigs, because there are a lot of minifigs included in the set. Lloyd, Nia, Sora, Aaron in a new suit, as well as Noct, the elemental master of brute force, and Tur, the Dragonian general. Altogether, the minifigure selection is pretty decent, with the only new figure being Aaron in the Stormer black suit, where he has a dual-colored version of his original hood, but this time in black, which is really nice to see, but the rest of the figure we did see in the January wave. Tur is technically new, but it's just a standard Dragonian warrior with longer horns, so I just want to focus on the most important new character, which is Aaron here. To me, this is the perfect evolution of Aaron's outfit, to showcase a darker and more serious side of him, especially as now he's teamed up with Lord Raz. I think it is a really interesting type of design, and I'm really curious if the magenta dragon on his torso is meant to represent Thunderfang himself, or maybe just a darker version of the standard dragon he had on the suit. And altogether, he is just using the standard Ninjago Dragon's Rising armor, which is very mixed to me because I think the big issue I have with it is you can't rotate the heads to put them on display. You can't turn the heads whatsoever. The mask is built into the armor. I have talked about that ad nauseum. I have spent a ton of time just kind of saying that Ninjago needs to change that system because while it is cool to be able to swap the top parts and bottom parts, it is really unfortunate because if I want to pose my characters, if I want to be able to take photos of them in interesting environments, I want to be able to make them look alive and be able to make them turn their heads, and you can't really do that with this character. Altogether though, it is really nice to get, and with that we can move on to taking a look quickly at some of the rest of the characters. I'm not really going to spend any time taking a look at Lloyd and Nia because again, we just got them earlier this year, although it is nice to see Lloyd with his armor element. Sora, on the other hand, it's pretty interesting just using her standard Dragon's Rising Season 1 suit with the armor as well as with the dual molded hairpiece. It's nothing super special, and again, it's really something that I wish we would get a new suit for the new ninja, especially because Aaron's getting a new suit. Would be really cool to see Sora get a new one as well, or even just at least use the tournament suit that she wore last season, but I guess they're maybe saving some of the newer suits for the new ninja for a later wave. Which I guess makes sense given that they're basically giving a new suit to every single one of the ninja now, and the cast keeps on growing and growing, so the more characters they add, the less budget they have to make new suits for every single individual character. Moving on from that though, we can take a quick look at Tur, the Dragonian General. Tur is really nicely built up, and I do love the Dragonians. They're a little controversial. I know a lot of people feel like they more fit in the world of, say, Nexo Knights rather than Ninjago, but given that they're supposed to be from the first realm, they're not from Ninjago, I think it makes sense they feel a little otherworldly and they feel different compared to other Ninjago antagonists. I love the brand new molds introduced for these characters with the wings and the baby dragon on the back and the helmet and the armor. It's just really nicely done, and I definitely do appreciate the amount of molds and effort that went into making them. It's cool to be able to amass a ton of these for army building, and I guess it is nice to get a named character, but since the only difference is longer horns, I definitely feel like even just a different head print would have been nice to get, especially if he is a more prominent character in the show, but I guess we're gonna have to wait and see if he's going to be a recurring character, or maybe just someone in the background. I'm really curious to see how they handle these characters in the show. And finally, we'll take a quick look at Noct. Noct is the elemental master of brute force and a member of the Forbidden Five who we did see in January, but it is really cool to get him in another set that isn't the largest set of the wave, and the design is really nice. The only major downside is that he doesn't have his tattered cape, and the first thing I did when I got this minifigure is put the cape on, because I really feel like it is a missed opportunity to not have the cape on this character, given that he very prominently wears it in the show. I don't really know if it's a budget thing or maybe they just decided to change around the look of him a little bit, but I definitely do feel like the cape is one of the biggest things missing from the character to make him stand out, but otherwise I really do like the design. I think the headpiece is really nice, the printing is cool, it's nice to get the Forbidden Five symbol on the back, and I absolutely cannot wait to have all of these guys together in one place by the time the summer wave comes, because getting all the Forbidden Five at once is gonna be so cool. But with that, we have summed up my review of Thunderfang, and I guess the last thing I have to talk about is value here. Thunderfang is actually fairly decent value for what it is. It retails for $70 US, and after playing around with the set, I definitely do feel like that is reasonable compared to other sets that we've gotten. Maybe it could have been closer to 60 or 65. It does have 668 pieces, so 70 is fairly reasonable, especially with the new dual molded head pieces as well as the vinyl wings and everything, but I don't know, I'm really curious to hear what other folks think of the value. Do you think that this set is worth it, or would you have rather it be a little bit cheaper for what you get? That's all for this review. Thank you so much for tuning into Duckbricks, and be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Bye for now.